Good evening and welcome to the Chatham Board of Selectmen's September 1st, a beautiful September 1st meeting. This is remote participation only. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be available shortly hereafter for scheduled and on-demand viewing on any smartphone or tablet device. If anyone else is recording the meeting, please notify me. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 23, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Chatham Board of Selectmen is being conducted via remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410. Conference ID number is 134-208-476#. Or join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access, and we will post a record of the meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. So at this time, I just want to remind everybody that we please mute your audio, and would you please disable your video unless you're presenting or called upon to speak. We'd appreciate that. So tonight, we are on our second meeting with the new public participation protocol. And tonight we will start off with the approval of the meeting minutes for August 18th. And we'll move to public announcements and agenda item requests, and then on to new business. And during new business, the first item is a public comment period where you may speak to any issue in the business agenda. And then we'll follow up with a town manager's report and then a follow-up of public comments after the discussions. Okay, so to kick us off, then I will accept a motion to approve the meeting minutes of August 18th, 2020. Do I have a motion?
I'm going to do a roll call.
I think, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. And Dean, I think you're mute or you need to have your volume up. I'll do a roll call of the Board of Selectmen. Thanks, Jeff. I'll start with you, Jeff.
Present.
Peter.
Aye, present. Jeez.
Dean.
Present.
And Corey is not with us tonight, and the chair is present. Okay, thank you. So we'll go back to approving the meeting minutes of August 18th, 2020. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve, Peter.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Are there any edits or changes to the document?
Madam Chair.
Peter? Yes.
Go
ahead.
I just have two small nits, really. Page 7, under small Roman numeral II, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sixth paragraph down, starting at the end of the sentence. The new sentence starts with the. It should be he, I believe. And then in the next paragraph, the second sentence down, in the middle of that sentence, where it says students in it per, it should be pre. I bet you, spell check probably didn't even catch those.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other edits or comments?
No.
Okay, hearing none, let's take a roll vote for approval. Selectman Dykens.
Aye.
Selectman Kokolas.
Aye.
Selectman Nicastro.
Aye.
And chair says aye. Okay, so 4-0-1 absent. Okay. Public announcements and agenda items requests. I have a few items, and then I'll turn to the Board of Selectmen, and then I'll take a roll call of anybody in the anybody remotely participating who'd like to have an announcement. So this is in regard to the COVID-19 cases reported at the Chatham Square. I'm just going to make a statement that the Board of Selectmen share the community's concern concerns after receiving notification from the town's health division of the reported positive cases of COVID-19 among the members of the staff of the Chatham Squire. The Squire has been a vital member of our business community for over 50 years and continues to be an anchor business in our downtown. The owners and the managers of the Squire, who upon learning that a staff member tested positive, immediately shut down, contacted our health division, and arranged for a deep cleaning and sanitizing of the business in accordance with the state and federal guidelines before reopening, and sent additional staff members for testing. After learning of additional positive cases, the Squire management voluntarily closed their doors for temporarily for additional cleaning. In accordance with the state guidelines, the Squire has collected contact information from patrons for tracing purposes. Those tracing purposes are done by Department of Health and visiting nurses. As we know from this and similar instances at other establishments earlier in the summer, frontline workers who are in contact with the public on a regular basis face greater risk of exposure. To reduce risk for the entire community, workers, residents, second homeowners, and visitors, everyone must be diligent at all times to stop the spread of the virus. Wear a mask when in public, maintain social distancing, and frequently wash your hands or use hand sanitizer. Local businesses are vital to the sustainability of our community and our economy, and we hope everyone will continue to support them and their employees. Please be assured the Board of Health and the Health Division staff are in regular contact with the Squire's management, are closely monitoring this situation. Okay, so moving on, I just wanted to give a little update, and I think Jill will be speaking to this later in her report. But Selectman Kokolas and I sat in on a meeting where we got a presentation on the census for the Cape. And we were able to, and the community outreach that's going on in Nantucket, and we were able to glean from that some actionable items that we're able to send over to Jill and town staff, and they've immediately taken action with those. And so I think the community has seen some signs up and whatnot, and there's some PSAs that are out there, but Jill will speak more to that later on. An agenda item, I just want to flag this for the Board of Selectmen coming up. It came to my attention through the Shellfish Constable that FDA has been working towards redefining the classification of our water quality standards in and around our mooring fields. And so there are some conditions that may be coming forward. I think that they've written in the language around our moorings and marinas that could impact our shellfish industry here in the Cape, and particularly for Chatham, our wild shell fisheries in our harbors and bays, and then in places like Oyster River. So I wanted to get that on our radar to be able to discuss very soon, to be able to advocate or create some comments that we can weigh in on this matter. Massachusetts has done a fantastic job of water quality testing and management of our bays and systems, and so has in our own town. So this is something that I think we should be very concerned about. All right, saying all that, I'm going to ask if any of the board members have a public announcements or agenda item requests. No. Nothing today. Jeff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, something's been gnawing at me, and I take a little walk in the morning, walk around the block. Some of it is along Route 28, and I want to tee up nip bottles somehow. The nip bottles that are everywhere, it's disgusting. So people drink a nip and chuck it out the window. And I counted, going out of my driveway today, going up to the farmer's market, I counted 16 nip bottles in like 400 yards. So it's like, it's out of control. So I know Mashpee was teeing it up, and I don't know what I'm even suggesting. I would just like to start our research down the road where we do something about trying to control the proliferation of nip bottles. It's ridiculous. That's kind of number one. Number two, I wouldn't mind also kind of reinstigating a look at paid parking in Chatham. And I know it's somewhat controversial, but as we have ever dwindling sources of revenue in town, I think at least for some part of the year, paid parking would be a good idea. So again, we've looked at it a couple times, and I don't quite recollect what the final tally was on our potential opportunity, but I would just like to tee up, just so we're well informed. So Jill, I think there's some research out there, but I'd just like to see it again. And those are two kind of, at least certainly the parking we've visited before, but the nip bottles thing it's out of control. It's crazy. Anyway, so either we tax it or we outlaw them or we do something. I'd like to do something. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Anything else from the board? Okay, I'll take a roll call of anybody who wants to make a public announcement or agenda item request from the remote participants. Anybody wish to do so?
Elaine Gibbs.
Anybody else? Okay, go ahead, Elaine.
Yes, this is just quickly regarding Oyster Pond this morning. There were 2 seals in the swim area and there was no lifeguard. I would have, the Parks and Rec didn't meet today, so I was going to ask them about it. I'm not sure why there wasn't a lifeguard, but they were in the swim area and there were people on the beach with little children. So I think that's something we've got to keep an eye on. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other remote participants like to make a comment? I mean, an announcement or agenda item request? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 3, new business. And our first item is to hear public comments on any of our business agenda items. And I will take a roll of anybody who would wish to speak on those items.
Elaine Gibbs.
Anybody? Elaine, okay. Anybody else wish to speak on any agenda item in our new business? Nothing? Okay.
George Myers.
George, thank you, George. Anyone else?
Phil
Okay,
Richardson.
hearing none. I'm sorry, say that again.
Phil Richardson is here if you want to talk about the SRAC item.
Phil, we accept public comments on the agenda items. So if you'd
I'm
like to
sorry.
make some comments, if you'd like to make some comments, we'll welcome those comments at this time. So you'll be third to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Unless you're part of the presentation with Shrek.
I'd rather speak if there's any questions after on the SRAC items. That was the only reason I'm speaking up.
Okay, all right. Okay, go ahead, Elaine.
Yes, I would just like confirmation that the last item, which is the special town meeting for the petition, there is not going to be any discussion tonight because the petition wasn't submitted. I just want to make sure because it's at the end of the meeting and there may be people on or listening that wanted to comment. And I assume it's not going to be a discussion item.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed my notation on this, that the placeholder item 5 will not be discussed tonight.
Okay. And my only other comment is I hope Dr. Duncanson does talk a little bit about the protocols for restaurants. I am a little concerned that on Sunday, the restaurant knew they had a case and then they did some deep cleaning, but then they opened again while others were being tested and then they came back positive. I think the public going into a restaurant where there is an ongoing question as to how many people were impacted in terms of staff should know that before they go into the restaurant. Just because you get one positive and do a deep cleaning, if there are other employees, it seems like all of them should be tested at that point before the restaurant opens again, because I think that's how we get multiple cases. So maybe you could just talk about it, because I really don't understand that rationale of being able to open up before all the employees are tested, or staff, since it turned out there were 3 additional ones. Thank you. That's it for me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elaine. Mr. Myers. Mr. Myers, are you there to speak?
Yes, I'm here. Actually, I prefer to wait until the item B3 comes up. I wasn't sure whether I had to make a statement now or wait till the issue comes up. I prefer to wait.
You can make a statement now or after. You can make a statement now as item A on the real estate tax exemption discussion, or you can wait till the public comments afterwards. So if you'd like to speak now, I'd welcome that. But we do not have any speakers, any public discussion during the agenda item discussions with the selectmen.
Well, I'll wait.
Okay. All right. Okay. Who else was there? Mr. Richardson.
Yes. No, I was only going to be an information source if there were any questions.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So moving on, we'll go to item B, business in the business agenda. Number 1, coronavirus COVID-19 update from the Director of Natural Resources, Dr. Robert Duncanson, and then from Town Manager Jill Goldsmith. So, Dr. Bob, are you there?
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Board of Selectmen. So here's our quick update on where we stand with COVID-19 right now. Right now, on a worldwide basis, there's a little over 25.5 million cases, and there's slightly over 850,000 deaths. In the U.S., we are now over 6 million cases and over 184,000 deaths. In Massachusetts, as of the 4 o'clock numbers this afternoon, we have over 128,000 cases. And we are slightly over 9,000 deaths in the Commonwealth. For Cape Cod alone, we currently have 1,630 confirmed cases. And just reiterating, those are confirmed cases. In previous months, we had access to both confirmed and probable cases. The state is now providing information on probable cases only once a week on Wednesdays. So the numbers that we get on a daily basis are now confirmed cases. So that number may seem a little lower than some numbers we reported earlier in the month of August, when we still had the ability to report on both confirmed and probable cases. And right now on the Cape, we are holding at 165 deaths, pretty much the same place it's been for the last couple of days, which is a good thing. Quick update on Chatham-centric numbers. Over the weekend, we did receive word from Mass DPH of 3 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Chatham residents. One of those was related to a Chatham student who was tested prior to attending an out of private school, basically. And the other 2 cases were folks that were visiting Chatham but staying in Chatham for an extended period of time, and they're going to remain in Chatham through their quarantine period. So we did have those 3 new cases reported to us over the weekend. And then just a little bit of expanded information on the Chatham Squire. We were initially notified Sunday evening that the Squire was made aware of 1 staff member who was COVID-19 positive. They informed us at the time that they were closing the restaurant for the rest of the evening to conduct deep cleaning, and they had already made arrangements to bring in a specialized company yesterday morning to conduct the required sanitization of the entire facility. And based on all that and everything else being the same, they were planning to reopen yesterday for lunch and dinner. Subsequent to that, they also informed us that they were sending 15 other employees out to be tested, which was conducted yesterday. Those employees were not in the restaurant yesterday after it was deep cleaned, and so were not in contact with anyone else. And of those 15, late last night, they informed us that 3 additional folks had tested positive. Out of the 4 cases reported to us, 1 is a Chatham resident, 2 were residents of Harwich, and 1 is a resident of South Yarmouth. And then earlier this morning, they informed the health division that they were going to be closing down for next several days while they undertook some additional deep cleaning and, got things kind of settled and back under control, if you will. So that's the latest update. We've been in pretty much constant contact with them since Sunday night. So far, they have met all the guidelines and criteria set out by the state regarding restaurants and how they should respond to these events. And they've been very forthcoming in reporting things to us and keeping us informed of what their plans are going forward. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I see that Peter has his hand up, and then Jeff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to be clear, the Squire closed down Sunday and they haven't opened up since then. Is that correct?
No, they closed down Sunday evening and they remained closed for the rest of Sunday night. But then they did reopen yesterday for lunch and dinner.
Okay.
And they closed down this morning, or they notified us this morning they would be closing down today, probably likely until Thursday at least. But that reopening date is still somewhat up in the air.
Okay. I'll let Dean ask. Go ahead.
Jeff,
Whoopsie.
did you have a question?
Whoopsie.
Jeff, did you have a question?
I lost you. I'll be back.
No, you're there. We can hear you and see you.
Okay. Yeah, I was just
Okay.
wanted to ask Bob, did the Squire test all the employees or just the ones I know that have been in contact with the employees that tested positive?
I can't answer. I know they tested 15 additional employees yesterday. I assume they were testing the people that may have had contact with the initial case that was reported Sunday night. They had indicated to us that that individual had not worked at the Squire since last Wednesday and was working in a position that may not have had contact with other members of the staff, if you will.
So I guess to follow up, Judith is comfortable with their approach, and you are as well, and they're abiding by the state guidelines, Bob. And do we want to do anything more than the state asks of us?
At this point, no. We both Judy and I have been in touch with them. Judy's out of the office today, but she was in touch with them yesterday to follow up on a couple of issues. And as I said, so far they've been very responsive.
Mm-hmm.
They're meeting all the criteria that have been set for restaurants in terms of how to deal with these situations and what their response should be. So yeah, we've been very satisfied with the way they've responded.
Okay, thank you.
Jean, did you have any questions for Dr. Duncanson?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. My questions may have been answered, but I thought Ms. Gibbs raised an interesting question. Had to do with really what are the state protocols when you do have a case that's positive, and it sounds as though this particular individual was in contact with the persons that were subsequently tested, and perhaps with no one else, but we don't know that for certain. I guess I'm a little bit puzzled that they were able to reopen the second day.
Yeah, me
That's
too.
the thing that I think that was perhaps the central to Ms. Gibbs' question, and I think it's a good one. What is the state protocol for this type of situation?
The state protocol would be they'd close down and conduct the deep cleaning and sanitization. And then after that, they can reopen, which is what they did. We had talked with them about what they were planning to do. They brought in an outside company that's very specialized in doing sanitization for restaurants. So as far as we know, based on all the information that we had and the questions we asked, they followed the proper protocols.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Duncanson.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Our next update is from Town Manager Jill.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chairman. So Bob and I have been working closely on a reopening plan for most town offices. And so on Thursday, we're having an all-employee Teams call to talk about our workplace information session and doing a soft opening for employees to return back to work on Tuesday, September 8th. employees have all been in the office at some point, but they've been in rotations. And now that we've completed the workplace modifications, we think we'll be ready to open to the public by appointment for limited hours. So I will provide a press release and more information after we have our employee meeting on Thursday. And we have the reopening plan that I think is good to go, but we just want to talk about it with the employees and make sure that we're operating consistently when the appointments are made, as well as informing people that they can still use our drop boxes, phone, email, whatever we can to try to protect the health and safety of our employees and the public as well. So again, it will be limited hours, and I'll provide that more information on that. I'm looking for the week of September 14th. September 14th is also the time where we're going to start our park program at the community center. And so staff right now is working through their reopening plan and coordinating with the school as well as Monomoy Community Services. So I think everything is looking good. We have contingency plans, and it will basically be that the community center will be closed to the public except for the park program. And the park after school program starts about 2 o'clock, and they'll be downstairs in the lower level or outside, and maybe some use of the gym. And this is so that we can have the area cleaned and kept somewhat separated from the public accessing the community center. So this would be a phase 1 reopening of the community center only for the park after school program. We thought it was important to help families and those who would be returning to school and work. So I'll have much more information on this after Thursday. We'll do press releases, and I can announce it in more detail and have it in the packet for our next meeting. And just busy with that, and I think that's it. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a question, Jill, and it's a let's hope this never happens sort of question. But if there is an issue with the schools, what will our guidelines for either having to close or to make any adjustments? Will they be the same for the park program, or will you continue to have it open? Or are you prepared, obviously, for some sort of action plan?
The state licensing for the park program is pretty similar, if not the same, for the schools. So if there's a trigger for closure, we're basically kind of accompanying the schools in serving to assist them and to assist the teachers for the after school program. So long story short, there's a plan in place. I don't know the exact details, but if there's a closure for the schools, I think that we're going to have to close as well because of the certain requirements for kids entering the building and so forth. So again, a lot of this information is out there. We just need to cull it to make sure that we follow all the guidelines. And if a child does get sick at the park program, we follow the same protocols as the school for the isolation. And we've had conversations as a group with the park program, the school district, as well as the school nurses. So there's a lot of information sharing, and we'll have a plan B if for some reason there is a positive case or some contact that we have to address.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions for Jill?
No.
No, nothing from the board?
No.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to move on to our next item, Summer Residence Advisory Committee 2020 report to the board. And I'd like to welcome the chair of the Summer Residence Advisory Committee, Catherine Malfa, to give us the report. Catherine, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Hello. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I can hear you. We can hear you, and now we can see you. Welcome.
Okay, good. We're pleased to provide this report to the Board of Selectmen regarding our activities during the summer of 2020 and our recommendations to the Board of Selectmen. As you know, this year was like no other, and we thank you for approving our request to continue our work during the pandemic, including both holding virtual meetings and producing our first SRAC 2020 summer video presentation. We would first like to give special thanks to several individuals who assisted our committee this summer. Shauna Neely provided ongoing assistance to me as chair, including formatting our agendas for virtual meetings. Shereen Davis and Jill Goldsmith assisted me in charting our course for this summer. And Jill continued to provide support to the committee throughout the summer, both attending our virtual meetings and managing our requests for assistance from her staff. Craig Rowe and Mark Van Bork from Chatham's Information Technology Group provided training to each of our committee members on the MS Teams program. They both held small group sessions and individual consultations for those of us who needed extra help. And I was one of those with an Apple computer. It was a little difficult to get caught up with MS Teams, but they were able to help me with that. And Craig also set up and attended each of our virtual meetings. And finally, Ryan Dahman, media coordinator, led the effort along with Craig and Mark to produce our first Track 2020 video presentation. So we appreciate the time, effort, knowledge, and professionalism of each of these individuals. Our work this summer would not have been possible without the assistance of this dedicated group. We were fortunate this summer to have presentations at our virtual meetings from several town representatives, including Shereen Davis, Jill Goldsmith, Alex Halela, Finance Director, Stephen Daniel, Chair of the Finance Committee, Tom Temple, DPW Director, Katie Donovan, Director of Community Development, Ali Sabatini, Principal Planner, and Dr. Duncanson, Director of Natural Resources. Shereen and Jill provided an update on the town's activities, including the work accomplished prior to the advent of COVID-19 and the many steps taken by the town to address the current pandemic. Alex and Stephen Daniel provided information regarding the close monitoring of town finances due to the uncertainty of COVID and the impact of COVID on both the merchants' businesses and the town budget. Tom Temple discussed the West Chatham Road project and other projects planned for the fall. Katie Donovan and Ali Sabatino provided a presentation on the work of the 365 task force and the continuing efforts underway to address the need for affordable and attainable housing in the town. And finally, Dr. Duncanson discussed the town's response to COVID-19 and the plans to open town offices. Each presented to our committee afforded the members time to ask questions and provided knowledgeable and thoughtful responses. We thank the speakers for their excellent presentations and for taking the time to address our committee during this difficult year. So we did produce our first Summer Residence Advisory Committee 2020 video presentation. As you may know, this would have been our 74th annual in-person Summertown meeting. But in light of the pandemic, we produced this first video presentation. And the video was aired on the day our annual meeting would have been held, August 11th, and continues to be available online. We followed the format of our previous in-person SHRAC annual meetings, and the virtual 2020 video includes presentations from several town officials. Shereen, Jill Goldsmith, and Alex spoke on the state of the town and the impact of COVID-19 on town finances. Ted Keon provided a presentation on coastal resilience and dredging. And Dr. Duncanson spoke on health and Chatham's response to COVID-19. We also had two presentations from SHRAC committee members. Jamie Meehan presented the Chatham scorecard, outlining the town's tax rate as compared to other Cape towns, along with other financial information. And Phil Richardson provided a presentation on SHRAC's attainable housing recommendation, which I will discuss in a minute. As noted above, the program was coordinated and made available through the guidance, support, and direction of Ryan Dahman, Craig Rowe, and Mark Van Bork. And we would like to thank the IT and media staff, along with the Board of Selectmen, the town manager, and the town officers, and each of the presenters for their participation and assistance throughout this project. Now I will turn to our 2020 reports and recommendations. During this summer, we formed small working groups to study issues relating to the town. Our working group included folks focused on the 2020 Chatham scorecard and the 2020 video, as well as attainable housing, the residential tax exemption, and capital project prioritization and debt. The full SHRAC committee unanimously adopted reports developed by each of these working groups. These reports are attached to the Board of Selectmen agenda along with this full report from the committee. With regard to attainable housing, we recommend that the Board of Selectmen consider our proposal for a cluster housing development built to provide attainable housing for young families and young professionals. In our proposal, the land would be donated by the town and a local developer would design and build the project. This would be a private public demonstration project with a cluster of 10 approximately 1,200 square foot homes at a sale cost of approximately $300,000 each. Each home would have 2 to 3 bedrooms, and the housing cluster would include a common area, 10 one-car garages, and 10 parking spaces on 1 acre of land, creating a small town character. The target buyer would be a young family or young professional who would commit to being a year-round Chatham resident and whose annual income did not exceed 200% of the area median income. We have identified several steps that will be necessary to achieve this housing objective, including securing the commitment of the town to provide the land, the commitment of a local developer to take on the project, specific zoning for a cluster development, commitment from a local financial institution, and community support for the project. You will see in the agenda items that we've attached specific architectural plans that have been developed to explore the concept we are proposing. I don't know if you want to put those plans up, Ryan, is that something we can do? Or Shireen, is that something you would like us to do, put the plans up there?
I don't know if Ryan's prepared to be able to put that document up or not, or Shauna. So why don't you continue, and then when we get to board discussion, if there's any questions, perhaps they'd be prepared by then.
Okay, great, thank you. The next issue we focused on was the residential tax exemption. In the committee's view, the residential tax exemption does not serve the best interests of Chatham and should not be adopted. We come to this conclusion by reviewing many issues, including that the residential exemption provides no additional revenue to the town while adding an additional layer of expense in the form of the required support that would be necessary for the town assessor. We also looked at the fact that the exemption takes money from summer and certain full-time residents who are excluded from the exemption and gives it to other taxpayers in a manner not based on any specific plan to achieve Chatham's goals and with a high risk of unintended consequences. We also looked at the fact that the summer residents pay personal property taxes and also pay an estimate of over 60% of the current residential taxes, while at the same time make only part-time use of town services and no use of the school system, which is a significant part of the annual town budget. Finally, we focused on the fact that the town's tax rate will increase to compensate for the reduction in assessments, and that the higher rate will apply not only to summer residential property, but to all ineligible residential property owned or rented by full-time residents. The committee believes it is important to highlight that not all full-time Chatham residents would benefit from a residential exemption. Those excluded include residents whose homes are owned by trusts or LLCs that do not meet the necessary requirements, Residents whose homes are assessed at a value above the break-even point, that is the value at which the additional tax imposed by the increased rate exceeds the savings that are offered by the reduced assessment, and residents who own more than one residential property. These residents will only be eligible for the exemption on the home that they own and occupy, and will pay a higher rate on other residential parcels, including rentals, and that cost may be passed on to their tenants. SHRAC believes that Chatham's goals would be better served by focusing on specific projects. The solution for home ownership by young working families, we believe, lies more broadly in the town's adoption of new zoning laws and incentives that encourage moderately priced homes. Further, programs related to childcare or working families and services for the elderly, in our view, can best be pursued with revenues available to the town without making the disruptive and largely unproductive changes that flow from a residential exemption. Finally, it is the committee's view that Chatham summer residents are good neighbors and an integral part of the community. They take great pride in Chatham and its success and contribute their time and money to the town's charitable organizations, places of worship, and other community-sponsored activities. The Summer Resident Advisory Committee specifically has worked with the town to fight for our rights on Monomoy, to support the fishermen's use of the fish pier, to support access to waterways, and to support the town-wide sewer system, and to support our schools. For all of these reasons, our committee recommends that the Board of Selectmen continue its long-standing, well-based policy of not adopting a residential exemption. The last working group that I'd like to talk about is one that was focused on capital project prioritization and debt. For the past 4 years, SHRAC has supported the Finance Committee's strong recommendation that town leadership implement a program to evaluate and prioritize capital projects. In our 2017 and 18 reports, we made specific recommendations urging town leadership to improve its approach to prioritizing capital projects. The Finance Committee has made similar recommendations in its reports for the past 3 years. Our committee is pleased that Chatham has implemented a capital improvement plan developed with the assistance of the Collins Centers, but encourages the town to do more, particularly with respect to the prioritization of warrant-based capital projects. In addition, we urge town leadership to pay attention to what appears to be an increasing level of debt service in the upcoming years. In the course of our work, we found that information about the town's capital projects, including those underway, those authorized but not yet begun, and potential planned projects, was not captured in a manner which could be easily understood and analyzed by the public and other interested parties. Our committee recommends that the town assign a senior staff member to collect, organize, and publish the following information: a list of all warrant-based capital projects, including key information that are authorized and underway, a list of all warrant-based capital projects that have been authorized but not yet commenced, and a list of all warrant-based capital projects that are planned but not yet authorized, or may be potentially authorized over the next 5 years. We recommend that the information be updated periodically and published in a separate conspicuous section on the town website for everyone to look at and analyze and use as they see fit. With regard to the prioritization of capital projects greater than $250,000, we wholeheartedly continue to support the Finance Committee's recommendation that thoughtful decision around prioritization of capital projects needs to be made by town leadership. More specifically, we recommend that the Board of Selectmen selectmen with appropriate staff assistance become involved in evaluating warrant-based capital projects earlier in the process to fully look at and consider possible alternatives to the project, possible deferral of portions of the project, and the overall affordability of such warrant-based capital projects. With regard to debt, the committee believes that the town leadership is deservedly proud of its AAA bond rating and low residential tax rate. However, it goes without saying that the cost and affordability of capital projects are critical components in both of these metrics. Capital projects' costs are borne over an extended period of time and are often financed by borrowing. Annual debt service is a significant long-term cash outlay and clearly needs to be considered in evaluating new capital projects. Our review of the town's existing and projected debt service chart, which was provided by the town's finance office, indicates that debt service as a percentage of the town's total operating budget has been trending down from 21% in fiscal year 2017 to 16% over the past 5 years. However, what we researched was that using the median historical percent increase in the operating budget, debt service as a percentage of the total operating budget for fiscal years 2022 to 2027 is forecast to run noticeably higher than what we experienced between the years 2017 and 2021. TRAC encourages town leadership to fully consider debt service when it evaluates new warrant-based capital projects. We thank you for the opportunity to provide this 2020 report and recommendations, and we welcome your questions and comments. I believe we have present on this virtual meeting Mike Waters, who chaired the Residential Tax Exemption Group, John O'Toole, who chaired the Capital Projects Prioritization Group, and Phil Richardson, who chaired the Affordable Housing Group. Any of those three committee members can answer any of your questions, and I can as well. And we welcome your comments and questions, and thank you again for this opportunity to report to you.
Catherine, thank you very much for, I think we have a delay in your speak and video here, but I just want to say thank you very much for your report. It was a pretty comprehensive. I think some of the things we were, I think that we're working on in our goals and objectives. We have some similar parallel sort of thought processes here going on, and we'll be talking about a lot of this later in the meeting, particularly residential tax exemption and some of our goals and objectives as selectmen. But I do want to thank you and your committee members that worked on the particular projects and gave the report. It's thorough and very substantive. And I'm just going to put it out there for questions. I see that Peter has his hand up, and then Dean wants to speak. But first, I want to just ask that if you are not a presenter or part of the discussion, to please disable your video at this time and give an opportunity for others to be able to, who are speaking, be able to be seen. So, Peter, you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Catherine, and I thank the summer residents. You know, they put a considerable amount of time into this and effort, and I appreciate. And over the last, I don't know how many number of years, even when we were talking about a number of things we did in the planning board, I think it's they do an outstanding and provide thoughtful comments. By the way, and I think I mimic what, and I'll take it from Jeff anyway. I watched that video; it was outstanding, and I would recommend everybody to do it. You know, it's loaded with all kinds of information, and it gives a nice in-depth view of what the summer residents were looking at. I'm going to take a couple of the things quickly. I don't have really any questions. It might pop up a little bit later, but on the housing, I think the housing issue is the most important point I always take away with it. It's no surprise that I've been supportive of housing attainable and affordable housing. And this isn't, as was mentioned, it's an exploration. It brings up the fact that we really do need housing. I think that's important. And it's a concept and exploration of where we should go from here. The price point of around 300,000 is great for affordable. You could probably go a little bit higher for some things. The 1,200 square foot is something that is a reasonable place. And given the way the architecture is done, makes sense. The public-private partnership, I agree with that. The tough part, or the important part, which you hit on, are the next steps necessary. And that starts with our community involvement. And I'll be candid. I've had a number of people say to me, well, I don't know if that'll be good enough. That's the right kind of housing that we should have in Chatham. You have others that said, maybe you should mix it up a little bit. I have a number of people that say it's a good idea. There's a number of people that said, okay, they're pushing West Chatham. Where are we going to put it in West Chatham? Is it only good in West Chatham? How about all the property that we have in other places, like out at Middle Road? Is something like that makes sense? Should we have a few less houses? That's all stuff that has to be done. But the point is, you have to start with something. And I appreciate this effort, especially when you look at, it does have an architectural drawing. It does talk about how you could build something for $300,000. Well, I won't go into any more of that. The residential tax exemption, we're going to talk a lot about that next. Mr. Richardson did a great job. Great job looking at housing and from his perspective. George Myers from the Summer Residence did an in-depth review, and there's I can't remember how many pages it is, but it's very, very detailed and is important. And of course, we'll discuss that next time. My only point is, our discussion is for us to discuss what we're doing, and as we proceed, we have a public hearing on this at another time. So this sets the standard. Sets the stage for it, because there are going to be lots of potentially other opinions, and I'd like to hear what they are. I'd like to hear what analysis they have to do that. I'm going to go to the last page of the report, but on the capital, I agree with the listing that has. I put together my own kind of listing of capital projects, where we are, where we're going. It'd be nice to have what they recommend, and I think that was we had a goal similar to that as I believe Shireen mentioned, and I think it's an important thing. I do like lists like that. My whole issue with setting priorities, and I agree, the chart that's in the back here shows that we could grow to 21%. Our capital, capital is one of those things that you can play with, but debt service is not all bad. And it's how much debt and what makes sense for debt for this town. And right now, looking to the future, it's hard to decide that. That's something that's going to be growing. I mean, that we'll have to look at for sure. But when you take our capital improvements, it has to be bounced against our goals and objectives for a town. What is it that we need in this town? I always like to say, and I hate to use this, but you don't wait for the bridge to fall down to decide you have to build a bridge or fix the bridge. And that's the case with a lot of capital. That's not to say that I believe in a lot of debt. I believe it's important to respond to debt. But showing a chart like what's there, what goes up to 21%, that's kind of, I understand what the numbers are based on generally. And that's very important. I think it's a good chart that we can look at. But Mother Nature is not going to stop what it's going to be doing on our infrastructure. That we have to worry about. We have a town that's over 50%, that are seniors that we have to worry about. We have to worry about also a number of issues that have to do with our infrastructure that's old. So yes, we have to look at debt, but let's look at it in a smart way. And that's I hate to say this. I tend to preach sometimes, but I think it's important that we all understand that. And it's not something that this board hasn't discussed. We've done a great job of discussing how we are prioritizing. Just take a look at what we've done over this last year. So I thank you very much, Catherine. I thank the Summer residents. It's always nice having a separate set of eyes. you could say that they're neutral, but they're not neutral because they live here. And they pay a lot of our, over half of our, or up to 60%, I guess, of our tax revenue, residential tax revenue. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Who is next? Was it Dean? Did you have your hand up next? Would you like to go next?
I think I did. Okay.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine, for your very solid report. I'm typically very effusive in praising the annual report of the Summer Residence Committee, and I'm no less so this time. I do want to comment on a few particulars. The residential tax exemption, I join with what Peter said. We're going to talk more extensively about it. I think that George Myers and Michael Waters' report attached to it, whoever wrote that, is an excellent piece of work. I commend it to anyone who's interested in this topic, and everyone in this town, whether they're a summer resident or not, should be interested in it. With respect to the attainable housing project, that was a proposal that was put together by Phil Richardson, my next door neighbor. I think it's an interesting concept. I think a cluster concept is a good thing and worth examining. I think we have some samples of that already in town. I'm not sure where this is going to be located because I'm not aware of any property in West Chatham that the town of Chatham already owns that would be amenable to this. We have that property next to 1610, which is everyone wants to preserve for conservation and passive recreation. So that's not available. I know we have an RFP out. If something comes in, we'll have to take a look at it. It may wind up, something like this may wind up perhaps over in at Middle Road. And I would say something else about West Chatham. Given the road project and everything else, I'd, in the first instance, want to know what the people of West Chatham would think of locating something like this there. And as a New Englander, and I'm not an architect. This is obviously very well put together, but I know that I once lived in a condominium project where the parking was not necessarily adjacent to the residents. And when you're talking snow and a bad climate in the winter, a difficult, challenging climate, there's some issues there. So there might be some work to refining it or fine tuning it. I think Phil in his presentation indicated that this was a model that obviously lends itself to some fine tuning. But I do commend him and whoever worked with him on the subcommittee for the report. I did also watch the summer residence meeting, the 2-hour presentation. I thought it was an excellent one. I want to say something finally about prioritization of capital projects, because I agree with what Peter said. I think that the information you'd like to see posted on the town website and updated is a good thing to do. I think as far as the discussion on prioritization and on debt goes, it's fine, but I think it perhaps could have gone a little farther because just as with the Finance Committee's comments about prioritization, I think we would be assisted more if we had some specifics given to us, particularly in terms of what projects that are out there that are under discussion or proposal should we not go forward with. I mean, I can think of 4 or 5 really big projects: the senior center, the transfer station, stormwater control in the Kroll Road area, the upweller. There are some other ones in the distance, like salt shed. But I guess I would really find it helpful to know which of these should we not do. Peter said you don't wait for a bridge to fall down before you rebuild it. go look at the current senior center, and I challenge anyone in this town to tell me that we should stay with that particular building going forward. As far as the transfer station, there are real issues there. And we're going to address some of them because we had the annual town meeting appropriate some money to address OSHA and ADA issues, but there are deeper issues there. I don't think the stormwater issue is something that is going to go away. And I suppose the upweller is one that can be debated. I favor the upweller. I voted against going forward with the design until we got the grant money for that, and we just received it. But I can see that one as a debatable project. And as far as the debt side of things, if you look at the graph that Peter was referring to, the biggest chunk of debt is not any of these other projects I mentioned. It's the wastewater project, which the summer residents, as I understand it, pressed us to do.
Correct.
I think correctly so. So, we're doing our best to try to balance things, and I very much appreciate the input of, as Peter said, a different set of eyes, just as I very much appreciate the Finance Committee. But I think we should try to get a little more particular. And the only other comment I want to make in this vein is, and it's somewhat rhetorical, the biggest political issue that the town of Chatham had to deal with in this past year, and it's still pending, is the senior center. We had 2 special town meetings about it. We had a working group that came up with recommendations on 2 competing locations. And ultimately, that group determined that one was going to cost significantly more than the other. And we have had involvement in this issue from the Selectmen, the Council on Aging, and the Regional District School Committee, but there's no mention of this in the report. So I guess I was hoping that the summer residents would tell us what they think we should do. I know you did a report on the senior center a few years ago, and you kind of came to the same determination I personally did, but I think that's water under the bridge.
Yeah, we did focus on that last summer. There were actually members of our committee, Colette Trailer and Jill McDonald, who worked with the working group of the town to right-size that project. And I think, Dean, in terms of your comments about capital prioritization, you're right, we're not making a specific recommendation, and let's not do X, let's do Y. I think the overall thrust was more, what is the size of what we need to do here? And are there other alternatives as we walk through each one of those capital projects? So that was really the gist of where we were going there. And I think it's consistent with where the Finance Committee has been as well.
Well, thank you, Catherine. And I don't take that. None of what I just said takes away from my high estimate of your report. I very much value this report. I think it's a really positive and constructive contribution to the town's governance each year. And I appreciate the work of the committee. And I did work with Colette and Jill. I was chairman of the board back then on the working group. Peter was part of that with me. So, and their contributions were invaluable. So thank you very much. And I appreciated the work, and I hope you take my comments with the constructive thoughts that they were offered, constructive intentions behind them, and I appreciate your response just now. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Jeff, are you on in there to comment?
I am. I'm here. Thank you, Madam Chair, and hopefully I'm on video and voice. Yeah, I woke up one morning and turned channel 18 on, and there was the SRAC presentation, and I thought it was excellent. I was glued to it. Thought everybody did a great job, and it is incredibly informative. So I do recommend any citizen here to really take a good look at that report. I especially like Ted Kean's report on erosion, and the action on the waterfront was fascinating. He did a great job. Everybody did a great job, but Ted was really outstanding, I thought. And again, I think this is my 7th time I've heard the SRAC report. Every one of them has been excellent. it's really neat to note that this is the 74th year of this, the Summer Residence Advisory Committee weighing in here in the town, which is very, very impressive. I don't think there's any, I know there's no other town on the Cape that invites such comment and welcomes such comment. I'll keep my specific points brief. Most everybody's touched on points I was going to make. On attainable housing, I do like the concept of the small village community concept that Phil Richardson has fronted. I happen to walk, if you go down Sequoia Road, there's a little development called Sea Strand, and that's condos. It's not single family homes, but it's condos with parking separated from the condos. It's very lovely. It's more dense, but you get more people, and very nicely done. And I think this can be nicely done as well, well done as well. Where it's located, we need land. The town at present doesn't own land in West Chatham where it could go. We do need a developer, and we do need zoning changes, and we need financing, and we need community support. So I obviously agree with all those points, and I do think that it's going to take this type of approach to get housing that's priced at a price point where it truly is affordable. So whether it's in West Chatham or somewhere else in this town, I do think it's an approach that warrants further study. I think it's going to be interesting to see who responds to the RFP, and then I think we should wait for the response to the RFP to see how this proposal might fit with those responses. So we certainly await those responses, I think, with interest. We are going to talk about the tax exemption coming forward here a little bit. And again, I echo Selectman Castro, Mike Waters, and George Meyer did a great job with their memo, and more to come there. I think in general sentiment, it's going to be no surprise that I'm in agreement with their approach and their position. Capital projects, I appreciated Selectman Castro's points about, we're a little bit more of a political position here, and as a select person or selectman, and it's hard to divvy up these projects, or I should say capitalize these projects based on normal, if you will, a business approach, like a discounted cash flow or a real businessman's approach. So I asked the same kind of question that Selectman Castro said, which of the projects in our waterfront, for example, Riders Cove, 90 Bridge Street, the Upweller, our beaches, which one of those projects would one not want to do? When we know Riders Cove is eroding, degrading, and needs an upgrade. We have our landing at Crow's Pond that's desperate need of an upgrade. We have beaches that are being eroded all the time. Again, Ted Keon's presentation noted that. Do you not want to do a Council on Aging? Go tour that Council on Aging building at present and see how bad it is, and then come back and say, yeah, we don't want to do a Council on Aging. Our wastewater and our water infrastructure. We have to continue to invest in our water infrastructure. So I think it's a no-brainer. We have to. It assures us of having a very high quality of life here in Chatham as we go on. And then our transfer station is needy. And we have stormwater issues, and we have salt shed issues, blah, blah, blah. So I challenge folks to kind of look in the mirror and say, okay, don't do this one, do that one. It's difficult to prioritize. Not investing in our waterfront would be a mistake. Not investing in our infrastructure would be a mistake. Not investing in our seniors would be a mistake. So again, I just think we have to be fairly circumspect about the cost of these projects. And the SRAC's point about our getting involved earlier is a good one. And SRAC's point about our getting more information out to the public is a good one. So I support both those recommendations. But and I have been hamstrung, or I've struggled with how you do prioritize these municipal projects, because it's hard to measure real return, if you will. And I would argue that the Upweller is one of the only ones that has real return. So anyway, more to come there, and I do appreciate their input. It's always phenomenal to hear what they have to say. It's a thoughtful, intelligent group, and I look forward to obviously working with them, successfully as we go forward. And I really appreciate their input. So thank you very much, Catherine, and then everybody that's on this call, Phil and Mike and George and everybody. So thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
So I just have a couple more comments, Catherine, in light of this sense that I'm getting from the committee is when it comes to the proposal by Mr. Richardson, I found it to be really fascinating and a real good way to be able to get a lot of housing quickly. It's not. I looked at this. I looked at the proposal as not unusual in the respect that we do have a lot of clustered condominium complexes throughout the town. They're not visible really from roadways or whatnot, but they are, and they serve an affordable option to residency in Chatham. And so I look at this project as some, not as like a very scary zoning sort of concept piece, but that will obviously be taken into consideration. There'll be a lot of vetting going through that, and it'll start with us and move forward. As far as in the proposal, Mr. Richardson had suggested a local developer. I think it's really important that we understand that we don't want to be somebody's experiment on something like this. We need to have somebody who has that kind of background in affordable, in constructing affordable housing, and has the wherewithal to be able to do that if we want to make it a successful project for the community. As far as the capital projects are concerned, I sort of echo a bit of what Jeff had said. But I think a lot of it we have to keep in mind is how does climate change impact some of the capital projects we're dealing with on the waterfront, obviously. But dredging is a capital project as well. And these are going to be some of the things that we're going to be battling down the road. I think prioritizing is a great idea. Maybe we'll be looking at what is a service sort of project and what is a return on investment project, like Jeff had said. But I do appreciate everybody's work this summer. You have 10 short weeks to bring us your thoughts and opinions, and you efficiently do that, and appreciate that. So any further questions from my board, we'll move on. Or any further comments, Catherine, from you or from your committee who's been who put together the recommendations.
From me, I want to thank you again for giving us the opportunity to give this sort of report and recommendation to the board, and we appreciate all your comments. I don't know if Phil or Mike or John, does anyone have any further comments to make?
I don't. Phil, no.
Mike, I don't either.
So this is John O'Toole. Just one quick comment on the comment that you would have entertained recommendations for particular projects that might be deferred or more important or whatever. We did consider whether we should undertake that effort. As the board knows probably far better than we, that is not an easy project to undertake. So we chose not to get into the specifics of individual projects and chose to focus on the process. But we hear your comments, and we'll see where we go with that next year.
Dean, you had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer the suggestion that maybe the report in its entirety, or at least the portion that deals with the residential tax exemption, be forwarded to the Board of Assessors, and that the portion that deals with the affordable and attainable housing piece, including in each instance the sub reports, be forwarded to the Affordable Housing Trust and to the housing, whatever it's called now, the partnership.
Community Housing Partnership.
What used to be the Affordable Housing Committee. I think if that information could be passed on to the members of those bodies, I think that would be very positive for the town.
We will do that. We have already passed along our report to the assessor's office, but we will pass along the other one as well. Thank you, Dean.
The Board of Assessors is meeting this Thursday, and they're going to be talking about this, making a recommendation for the residential tax exemption, among other things.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Catherine.
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next item, which is real estate tax exemption discussion. Director Halala is going to make a presentation, and this was an agenda item request by Vice Chairman Kokolas, so I imagine that he'll have much to say after the presentation, and then we'll continue the discussion. Alex?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening. Happy to be here tonight to facilitate this discussion on the residential tax exemption. In your packet, I provided an agenda report, and I'll go over some of the points in that report right now. So just really some background on the residential tax exemption. As you know, every year the Board of Selectmen are the ones who decide at the tax classification hearing whether or not a residential exemption will be accepted or adopted for the coming fiscal year. There are 4 items that you have to vote on at the tax classification hearing. And again, the residential exemption is just one of them. And what a residential exemption does is it shifts the tax burden within the residential class from residents to part-time residents, or as has been stated before, from the lower valued properties to the higher valued properties, regardless of whether you're a resident or not, if you are over that break-even point. I've provided a quote of Mass General Law, which is Chapter 59, Section 5C, which is the residential exemption. And again, it's important to note on some of this that it is only for the principal residence of the taxpayer as used by the taxpayer for income tax purposes. So just highlighting that for the public out there to follow along with. What does the residential exemption do? Again, it shifts the property tax burden within the residential class from the lower valued properties to the higher valued residential properties, and for properties owned by year-round residents to the vacation homes and to residential properties not occupied by the owner. The residential exemption does cause a residential tax rate to increase, but it does not raise additional revenue. So we have to raise the same amount of revenue from the residential class. It doesn't bring in any additional revenue. And I think that's a point that sometimes is lost on the public. They think, oh, if we have this residential exemption, we'll raise more revenue. And it doesn't. In the packet, I've listed the 15 communities from fiscal year 2019 that had adopted the residential exemption. And if you look at the Cape communities, those were Barnstable, Nantucket, Provincetown, Tisbury, Truro, and Wellfleet. The other communities in the Commonwealth that have adopted the residential exemption are mostly the more large cities rather than small residential and seasonal towns. So there's a real split between whether you're on Cape or off Cape of who has adopted the residential exemption. The other communities are Boston, Brookline, Cambridge, Chelsea, Everett, Malden, Somerset, which I guess now has not continued with the residential exemption, Somerville, and Waltham. So a lot of those cities do have large commercial and high rental properties, apartments. And then I looked back at a Department of Revenue presentation from October of 2019 that was given to the local boards of assessors here on Cape Cod. And some of the points of discussion from that presentation that I thought were very pertinent to the conversation was that you have to look at each parcel, and a residential parcels could be for multiple use. And so if you have a multi-use parcel, then the exemption only applies to the residential portion. It must be your principal residence as of January 1st. So if you have changed your residency, say in June, that won't count until the next January 1st. So it's a date certain. So it's as of January 1st. The taxpayer is the owner, not just the occupant. And it's the principal residence as reported on the state income tax. So that was some of the reasons for people saying that this will put an extra burden on the assessor's office because they have to vet a lot of this information. Again, the exemption does not lower the property tax burden for all property owners in the residential class. Some of those will have a higher property tax burden. And it doesn't necessarily help all the elderly residential property owners. Moving through this, we'll see where the break-even point is for Chatham, which is quite high, and it went up quite a bit, but that's a few pages on. I provided the numbers for the estimate of what an impact would be at a 20%, 25%, and 30% residential exemption. And this is based on an estimated tax rate for FY 2021 of $4.97 without a residential exemption. So if the residential exemption was adopted at 20%, the tax rate would be $5.44. At 25%, it would be $5.57. And at 30%, it would be $5.71. And I think we've said that with the residential exemption, because you have to raise the same amount of taxes from the residential class, the tax rate does go up. So instead of $4.97, these were the rates that it would be at these percentages. Again, if it was a 35%, it would be a larger, higher than $5.71. The total valuation for FY 2021, we've had our values certified by the Department of Revenue, $7,2,554,885. That's on page 3 of the memo. And the average residential property is now valued at $944,759. So looking at that as an example of what the estimated tax bill would be for a property with a 20% residential exemption, the average home at just under $945,000 would save $580.71 with a 20% residential exemption. So, excuse me, moving on, we talked about the break-even point, or a point of neutral, benefit neutral assessment, and that's at the point where the assessed valuation is high enough that the exemption will cause the tax rate to be this, or the tax bill to be the same, whether there's a residential exemption or if there's not a residential exemption. So Chatham's break-even point right now is $2,197,224, and that's calculated by taking the total residential value divided by the number of eligible residential parcels, which gets to the break-even point. This is an estimate. It's a fluid number because, again, as we go through and vet each of the eligible parcels, this might change. The Board of Assessors, because FY 2021 was a revaluation year, they actually sent out a questionnaire to all the secondary homeowners, so we have a fairly good idea of what this is. So again, if you look at a residential property with a value equal to or higher than the break-even point, again, it would, with the residential exemption, they'd be paying about $11,430 with or without the residential exemption. There's a little bit of rounding there, and the difference might be because of the CPA taking the $100,000 off of your value prior to the other exemption, and that was at 20%. So again, that's a high break-even point here in Chatham. And moving on, for those of you following along, I'm on page 4 of the memo towards the bottom. Some of the points for the board to consider tonight is that the vote to adopt a residential exemption, as well as the other 3 items, are usually taken at the tax classification hearing. However, the vote could be taken any time prior to the tax classification hearing. So we're hoping to have, well, we're planning to have the tax classification hearing on September 15th so we can get the bills out in a timely manner. And we talked to our software provider, Vadar, as well as the bill printer. The bill printer, Globe Printing, stated that they need 2 weeks to process files for real estate and personal property, with or without a residential exemption. So that's why we're looking at September 15th to be the latest to have the tax classification hearing, so we can get the bills out on or around October 1st. For Vadar, if we were to adopt a residential exemption, they would need a sample file for our data bridge to build in development. And they're looking, and this is a quote from their email when we reached out to them, a couple of months prior to the changes needed. And we also, we're not sure of how much of the cost would be for the different programming. So if we're looking a couple months for a delay in getting the tax bills out, we'll probably be issuing tax bills mid-December with a due date in January, that's calendar year 2021. And a point that I raised in the agenda item was that the second half bill for FY 2021 would be sent out on April 1st, on or before April 1st, and due by May 1st. So property owners and taxpayers would be looking to receive 2 bills less than 5 months apart, which could be a burden for people in the beginning of the calendar year. There's also the issue that if we weren't issuing tax bills until mid-December, we will have some cash flow issues. We have warrants that, well, we have a warrant every week. So we run accounts payable one week and then the payroll warrant on the opposite week. So looking at those, in addition to the regular amounts that we have for our accounts payable and our payroll warrants, in December, we have contractual obligations for December and January that total approximately $2.5 million. And those are assessments, debt payments, as well as some of the contractual items included in the collective bargaining agreements. Monomoy Regional School District, the assessment and debt payments are due in December. We have debt payments of almost over $500,000 due in January, and up to February, we have, I believe, about, I'm just finding my memo here, additional payments of the debt obligation is $2.3 million through February. So that's a lot of cash going out the door. And we rely on our tax collections in November to pay that debt service and those assessments, as well as our regular bills. So if we're looking at that, we probably have to issue what's known as a RAN or a TAN, which is a revenue anticipation note or a tax anticipation note, which we do through, they're done. Usually we do the bond anticipation notes, but this would be a RAN or a TAN. And we can explain that to the Department of Revenue as well as the bond rating companies, because sometimes that's frowned upon if you're issuing a revenue anticipation note, meaning that you haven't planned well enough to cover your own bills. So just another point to bring up. I think the Vice Chairman had asked me to reach out to some of the other towns and see what some of their reactions were. So I reached out to the finance directors. I was trying to, I know that the assessors have stated a lot of their information to you in their memo, but I wanted to see what the finance directors and what they had heard from some of the residential exemptions that comments regarding the residential exemption. And one of the comments was, it might not necessarily bring families to town, but it is an incentive to keep or at least help keep families here. One more tool in the toolkit. That was really the only positive that I heard from them. Others said, comments, millionaires are benefiting from a tax rate while part-time residents are picking up the tab. This was another item from Provincetown. They realized that the rental properties, in order not to negatively impact rental properties, they wanted to expand it to cover year-round residents, people who rent their homes to year-round residents. So they had a home rule petition, which would have to be at an annual or a special town meeting if we were to expand that to that. And that's probably going to take a lot more vetting of what that actually does. I haven't had a chance to go into the complete expansion of that to year-round residents, rentals. A point that was brought up by the Summer Residence Committee, part-time residents already pay personal property tax and don't utilize the services of the town. Trusts were another big issue. Again, I think that was mentioned earlier because we would need to verify each trust as a taxpayer must be a trustee of record as of January 1st. And Chatham currently has over 1,800 trusts on record. And of those, 575 of those have a Chatham mailing address. So the assessors department would have to go through and vet and make sure in order to qualify for the residential exemption that the trustee was a permanent resident as of January 1st. So that would be a lot of extra work for them. Again, it may hurt the elderly residents whose property may be valued greater than the break-even point. This was interesting comment. The character of the town will change when you have a divisive practice such as the residential exemption. We've always heard that it may pit neighbor against neighbor, not fair and equitable to all Chatham property owners. And one thing that I did get from one of the finance directors says the time it takes to critically plan for its implementation is significant. So again, if the board were to look at this for a future date, we would ask that you would not do it for FY 2021, but to hold it off for a future date, and we can, provide more information again. And that's why I brought up the point that the vote can be taken at any time prior to the tax classification hearing, not necessarily at the tax classification. And we can do the work, and then if something changes before the tax classification hearing, you don't have to adopt it. That is the formal vote at that hearing. So I've also provided, attached to this, the overview of comments from the Board of Assessors, the Department of Revenue's IGR regarding the properties held in trusts, as well as some of the tax rates on the Cape. So again, my recommendation was to, we'll have the tax classification hearing in a couple of weeks. And if you want to give us further direction to review this more, we could do that. But again, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And I know that I believe the Principal Assessor Dale Kelly is on the line, as is our treasurer, if you have any other specifics for them.
Thank you, Alex. Peter,
Yeah,
I'm getting a little reverb if anybody is not muted. Peter, are you on? Do you want to kick us off?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You hear me okay?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for getting this on the agenda. And I appreciate the inputs that we had so far. I just want to make a couple of points. Every year, the Board of Selectmen, we have a responsibility to hold a public hearing on classification of tax rates. And there are 4 different tax rates. We don't have to go into that. But one of them is that we look at every year is the residential tax exemption. And to me, it's a major change that presumably, which was mentioned, shifts the percent of residential tax burden all the way, tax burden from our yearly residents to our second homeowners. My thought of getting this on before a public hearing was to have us a discussion ahead of time, mainly, so we have a baseline that we can talk to, because I've heard this a couple of times, and you have heard it a lot more than I have on residential tax exemptions. And, in the last 2 or 3 years that I was here, that I looked at this, we'd have a couple of people in the audience. Well, it's become a little bit more than that. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. And residential tax exemption is taken it's become something that is easily understood as moving tax from one place to another. We'll get into that. We started looking at this just to be back last fall. We've had inputs from the 365. Shireen and I were on that. We had recommendations to look at this from 365. We had inputs from a number of people that have made comments, some of which were somewhat confusing. And that's another reason I wanted to put this on there, on what really is this tax exemption. And we have a citizen's petition that is prescriptive on what it should do. It's a little loose on why and the analysis behind it, but it's there. So we were moving ahead to get it done. The Economic Development Committee was going to take responsibility to move forward with it. COVID changed all that and put a lot of what all of this on hold. And now that we came out of our annual town meeting, and the whole purpose is we are in September, and we're going to have to look at this again. So I thought, well, maybe we should have a discussion ahead of time. To be candid in a lot of ways, the way the residential tax exemption is offered, and I'll say that I'm leaning against it, but if someone has a good argument, I'm for it if it does what it's supposed to do. But it's offered as a way to help our year-round residents, right? Many of them struggling, and we know that, whether they're young or they're older. And a whole number of reasons, because of increasing home values, and transfers that to the second homeowner, and because they're viewed as presumably the cause of the problem for increasing our greater housing costs. Now, you can make an argument that they come in and they buy a house and they outbid somebody. You can make an argument that anybody can do that. There's more to it than that, in my opinion. I won't get into any of that, but there's zoning, there's variances, there's a whole group of things. But the question is, is this correct? Is more specifically, will a tax change be an overall benefit to the town of Chatham? It brings up a few questions. Will it be to all our residents, especially those the most in need? We've had in our package, we've had a detailed analysis. Alex did a great job. We have summer residents input. We've had, inputs from a number of people, personal people talking to me about it, either pro or against it. And there's concerns on what it really means. And there's some unanswered questions, not many, but some. I think that we need to be able to, at our public hearing, to be able to focus on the merits of this with public input, not based upon opinion, but based upon data and based upon what's known. And I think, given what we have, I think we're going to be able to do that. I just got to make a couple of points. We have, we have how many year-round residents? We have a certain number of homes that are year-round residents. It was put there as 3,000 or something or other. The assumption is a lower income home is going to have someone who has a lower assessed value home is going to have someone with a lower potential salary. And those with a higher income, higher assessed value home are going to have a higher income or be able to pay certain taxes in a way. I don't know if that's the case here in Chatham. You take a look at people that owned homes for years. You have, they used to call it the landed gentry. They're house poor. You also have people who moved here and downsized with they come as a summer resident and then stay here. And they're in a different situation if they come from a corporate field where they have a background, they have an IRA and so forth. So that assumption in this case, where you have almost a break, half and half of the half of the people are residents and half of the people are year-round residents, half are second homeowners. Unlike, let's say, Provincetown, where it's an 80-20 cut. Trust is another thing. Just because you have a trust doesn't mean you're a trust baby. It's a way to avoid probate. I know there's a lot of other reasons I'm doing this, but there are a large number of trusts in town. And if I read that, and Mr. Myers made a very good point of pointing out, and I'll even say I asked Dean about this, and I back and read it again. I have no clue how you would write a trust to do that. I'm sure that I could, if you have a trust, you're going to have to redo it, and it's going to cost you a few $1,000s in any case. So there's the question. And the question is, how many homes do we have under $500,000? I don't know. How many we have almost an average house price here is $1 million. All right. So there aren't as many homes that are lower priced. You've got a $580,000 savings for someone who has a median size home. The person who has a $400,000 or $500,000 is down. They get about $500. That sounds really nice, but if it's a small number or a smaller number of folks that are going to be getting that, there's better ways to get in to help them than to give benefits to people who don't really need it. And that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I'd like to hear if there's anything different in that. I guess that's all my comments right now. I'd like to hear a lot of discussion, and I don't have a problem, setting the stage for a public hearing, and I think that's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Dean, you're muted, Dean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Peter, for putting this forward. I think we, on my tenure on the Board of Selectmen, we had one or two occasions where this came up. There was an actual motion. I think it went down 4-1, or 1-4, I should say. and I was one of the people who voted against doing this. I think that the arguments that were put forward by the Summer Residence Committee and the Board of Assessors, and we'll hear a formal recommendation when we have the public hearing, and we'll hear from a lot of citizens at the public hearing. I certainly agree with those recommendations that have come forward thus far. I want to make a couple of random comments, and then I want to talk about trusts. Alex has pointed out that of the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, only 15 communities have adopted this. And 9 of them are basically cities or larger. I guess the town of Somerset doesn't qualify as a city, but I'm not sure why they're in there at all. But as has been pointed out, I think the reason they wanted to give their residents a break is that a large number of the residential properties in those cities and those communities are owned by out-of-state landlords. They're rental properties. It's not the same as our summer residents who come here and occupy their own homes. On the Cape, Provincetown, Truro, and Wellfleet have only recently adopted these, to my understanding. I don't know what the experience has been in terms of whether it actually has helped to attract and retain younger families or lower income families in the community. I haven't seen any evidence of that. And frankly, I haven't even seen any evidence of that in Barnstable and Nantucket, which has had this in place for a number of years. I do want to talk about trust because I think it's important to note, if you are a year-round resident, citizen, taxpayer, voter in this town, not one of the summer residents who would obviously be negatively impacted, but if you are someone who lives here year-round and you don't qualify for this exemption because you're over the break-even point, or if you have a trust that doesn't satisfy what the state says you have to have, not only don't you get the exemption, your taxes are going to go up. And as we saw in one of the examples, it goes up almost 75 cents. I think that's at the 20% plateau. I took a look at the DOR, the Department of Revenue guidance that was attached from 1991, and it's been verified by the assessor, that the assessing department, that there's been no update to that. And as has been pointed out, we have 575 properties in trust in Chatham with Chatham mailing address. And there are 1,800 plus trusts on record. And there are 500 LLCs on record, of which 111 have mailing addresses. I don't even know if the LLCs qualify at all. But here's what the Department of Revenue says to the assessors, to the Board of Assessors. They don't say it to the staff, to the board. You've got to examine each one of these applicants. And you've got to look at their trust instrument, their declaration of trust, and you have to determine that the trustee, that the owner of the property or the applicant is the trustee and the beneficiary. And that document has to be on record at the Barnstable County Registry of Deeds. I can tell you, I looked at a handful of properties at the Barnstable County Registry of Deeds. And I would commend anybody who's listening to this board meeting tonight to go, if your property is held in trust, go check what's on record at the Barnstable County Registry of Deeds, because I predict you will find in most instances your trust instrument is not on record. And there's a reason for that. Because trust instruments are used to avoid probate and also to preserve familial privacy in terms of how properties are to be distributed upon one's death. So what typically is put on record is something called a certificate or an abstract of the trust. And if you look at them, I think you're going to find in many, if not most instances, what's on record says, so-and-so is the trustee, this is the name of the trust, these are the powers of the trust, but they don't identify the beneficiary. And again, I don't think you're going to find in many cases the actual trust instrument on record. So one other point. Not all trust instruments are drawn the same. So the assessors are going to have to look at each trust instrument if it's presented, determine whether it qualifies or not. And they go on to say in the Department of Revenue guidance, you're going to have to talk with town council. So there is an issue of implementation that leads to a potential divisiveness between members of this community who live here full time and other members who live here full time. And there's going to be considerable effort and expense to examine and verify whether people qualify or not. I hope the Board of Assessors, when they make their formal recommendation to us at the classification hearing, will address the trust issue. I think this is a bad idea, and I hope that the Board of Selectmen does not adopt it. And I think it is an invasion of privacy for someone to have to provide the town of Chatham their private trust documents in order to qualify for this exemption, in order to prevent being taxed higher than your next door neighbor. This is the type of issue that really bothers me. And I hope it bothers a lot of other people in town, because I don't think it's a very advisable thing to do. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Dean. Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, both Peter and Dean have spoken very eloquently to this issue. And Peter, I do thank you for teeing it up in advance of public hearing. I think it is a very important issue. Many of our committees and subcommittees have raised the issue, and they've looked. I know the Economic Development Committee and others have looked at this as a way, and 365 has looked at this as a potential avenue of opportunity to kind of level the playing field, if you will, in terms of overall economics in the town. And I think the package that Alex and the Board of Assessors put together was truly excellent. And I've looked at this as a member of the board. This is probably my third time, but this is the most complete analysis that I've seen. And the glaring problem with me is this trust issue that Selectman Castro just mentioned. And I've always maintained that having a residential tax exemption was potentially divisive, and I always couched it or put it in the context of residents versus non-residents. Why would we pit them against one another when in fact the non-residents do an extraordinary amount of contribution to our overall tax base and don't demand the services of year-round services. So I think we're tremendously advantaged economically by having these non-residents here contributing to our operating budget and not demanding our services. But to get back to my earlier point with the trust, and so now we've got the potential issue in my mind of residents versus non-residents, and now we have a potential issue of residents versus residents internally themselves. It is an invasion of privacy to tell folks that they got to belly up with or give their trust documents over, et cetera. So, and plus, the amount of work that this presents to the assessor's office is extraordinary. To grant those exemptions, that assessor's office would have to go through every one of these trust documents for those that have applied for the exemption and determine whether or not the owner is in fact the owner and also trustee and beneficial and a beneficiary of the trust. They would have to do both in these pour over trusts. So an extraordinary amount of work, and I'm not certain that the return is worth the effort. That's my point. I just don't know what the overall real return to our residents that would qualify for this exemption truly is versus the overall cost of its implementation going forward. So for all those issues, I voted against this at least twice, and I will do it. I will do the same going forward. I'm against this exemption, and I will vote against it. And I do look forward to having the opinion from the Board of Assessors forthcoming on the 15th and hearing what comes out of the public hearing as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. I think from my point of view, the undertaking or the implementation of the whole project seems to be daunting. But I also want to I also wonder, like, what kind of properties? The trust issue is a big issue, but I mean, what do we have for properties here? Do we have people investing and renting their properties and not even occupying them? Is there a substantial amount of that kind of thing going on in town aside from summer residents? Because there's more than just residents, non-residents that occur here, and we've been hearing a lot about people coming in and purchasing property recently. Quite a bit, and whether they're going to move here and live here or their investment pieces to hold money or whatnot. But I guess from my point of view is the big issue is who is this going to benefit and who is this going to impact and and where's the balance here, and how do we get to that answer? Are we going to do? Can we do a long-term look-see at this and get a better evaluation of it? Is that something the Economic Development Committee could take on and give us a better understanding of? I'm unsure of that, but I do appreciate what we have been given tonight in information to move forward for our hearing coming up in the next couple of weeks. I personally didn't have a flavor for moving anything forward in any fast manner at all. If we were to consider this at all, it was pretty interesting that the break-even point is up at $2 million. That was quite interesting, and the evaluation of the trust issue was quite profound. So more to follow, unless anybody else has any more comments. Unless Alex has any more she'd like to share, or any of the staff from the assessor's office or the tax office want to share something more, we'll be continuing this conversation in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, as was mentioned by Selectman Castro, the Board of Assessors will be talking about this at their meeting on the 3rd, and they'll be making their recommendation in advance of your meeting for the tax classification hearing on the 15th. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And thank everybody for the comprehensive report. Oh, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go
just
ahead,
a quick point. Not that it's necessary right now, but maybe you made a point about long-term. Does it make sense? And how do we figure it out? I mean, maybe there's a way to look at this to see if there is really a benefit to a group. I don't know how we do that, because what you're going to have to do is try to get people's financial information. That's not going to work. I don't think that's fair at all. So, maybe somebody smarter than I could figure out a way to do that, but it's certainly not a short-term short-term project. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate the presentation. Dean has one more question, Alex, or comment.
Try to address Peter's point rhetorically. It seems to me some things are just not worth pursuing. You have enough information up front to know that something is not worth going forward with. That's where I'm at in this. That's where I was 3 years ago when this was brought forward. So that's how I feel. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? All right. Thank you, Alex. We're going to move forward to the next item to discuss, which is our calendar year 2020 and fiscal year 2021 Board of Selectmen goals and objectives. We asked, in light of everything that's going on with the COVID-19 issues, when we first did our goals and objectives, it seemed like we started out with good intention, and then the pandemic happened, and it may have or may not have shifted some of our priorities. In light of, I think it certainly has for me in looking at some of our projects and things like that. I do want to say that the town manager's goals and objectives are included in this report. And I didn't know if Jill, did you want to kick us off with this or lead any of the discussion, or should we just go forward?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, as the chairman had said, it was probably November, December, and January when we were putting the goals and objectives together, and pre-COVID. So, like I had said, it was the first time in many years that I actually presented a growth budget in January, and we quickly pivoted to where we are with our COVID financial plan, which has served the town well, including the town meeting that we had on June 22nd. So it's September, it's fall. I wanted to get the board thinking about where we are with these goals and objectives, and just to bring you up to date on some of the items are still pending, as you can imagine, with the COVID hitting us just 2 months after the adoption of the goals and objectives. So in your packet, you have, as the chairman had said, you have the first matrix, which is for the Board of Selectmen. And then I have a column there for priority. And if you want to comment tonight or after the meeting, some of the items you feel that are priority. But I think when we start or resume our discussions for our next budget cycle and our next budget summit, which is going to be in October, I think it's a good start for us to look at where we are and then give me some ideas on how to prioritize the department heads to meet these goals and objectives, as we look to start the budget process for FY22. So that's my introduction. Pending in the notation means that an item has not been initiated. Ongoing means that it's been initiated but not complete. And then action items that have been updated since your vote in January are underlined. And there's just a couple of actions, and that relates to certain items that were put on hold specifically for COVID. So that's it. I'm happy to move forward as you deem appropriate.
Thank you, Jill. I wonder if anybody would like to kick off their thoughts on this. First off, Dean, why don't you go ahead and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to offer any substantive comments at this point. I think we're just really talking process at the moment, because at some point we're going to have that. Well, typically we would meet on a Saturday morning at town offices, but can't do that now. To discuss our goals. And I guess I wanted to suggest, and Jill just offered one suggestion, that we might perhaps take this document and identify any of these existing goals and objectives that we deem to be priorities. And perhaps Shauna can also send us the form that she typically sends us, where we enter our own ideas. And those are all aggregated, and that's the document we discuss when we're refining our goals and objectives at the meeting when we do have it. Is that what we're looking to do, Jill, rather than having a discussion of each tonight?
Yes, and I would normally provide you an update probably 6 months after we did the goal setting process, just to check in so the board knew, and then we can adjust our priorities for the selectmen's agenda items and future agenda items. So here we are. I think that you individually can note priority, and we can put a formula together for, tier 1 or tier 2. But I'm not so sure that all of these are going to come off of your list. It might just be a lower priority versus trying to get it done by June. Oh, actually, we can figure out for December 31st, 2021. So a full calendar year for the next year moving forward. So this is a kind of a bifurcated process. It's a calendar year goal, but it's related to a fiscal year for the funding of many of the items that require funding here. So what I wanted to do is give you an update on the calendar year 2020, fiscal year 2021. Fiscal year 21 was voted on June 22nd, 2020. And then just keep this in mind as we move forward to the next budget summit in October. So with staff now coming back, we'll be resuming the more than core services than we've been providing as it relates to other non-COVID initiatives. And I wanted to bring that to your attention as well, that we can start to do that, but we still, and because of that, we're going to need your priority or your prioritization of how you want us to proceed.
All set, Dean? Any other questions for Jill? Okay. Yeah, I think that I think when we're looking at this, we're looking at through a different lens than we were obviously a year ago. We have a lot of economic uncertainty for the community, COVID related, post-COVID related. I think we have to be super sensitive to treading lightly in our spending and what we want to see. I think service to the community is really important in my eyes, as well as things that will drive the economy and to help people, some of our residents, with housing. The housing issues are obviously, I think, are really important. So I look forward to something, to moving forward and discussing this a little more substantively, at a specific meeting. But I wanted to hear from everybody what their thoughts were, just general thoughts for now. Peter, did you have anything, or Jeff?
Jeff was before me, Madam Chair.
Okay, Jeff, go ahead. I didn't see
Yeah.
anybody. I can't see Jeff for some reason.
You can't see. Okay. Well, anyway, I have no, deep comment here. I think when I went through the list, many of these things are still wants, desires, goals, objectives. I think prioritizing them is a good idea. I think it dovetails with SRAC's recommendation, or some of them dovetail certainly with SRAC's recommendation this evening. I appreciate the chairwoman's point that, in fact, we are looking at these in a different lens, and we are. So I think that us revisiting these with that lens is very important. And I know these are all great goals and objectives, but my priorities have changed a bit given COVID and, frankly, with the ascension of attainable and affordable housing, which is, I think is absolutely critical. So I look forward to reprioritizing them. And also with a lens for capital projects, and as they're baked into here a little bit too, or a lot. So I thank you for that, and I look forward to our next session on them. And I thought those sessions that we had getting together, we can do them by Zoom or whatever. We can do a Saturday morning at some point and do the same thing. I think those are very valuable. I think they've been very useful in the past. Thank you.
Certainly have. Thanks, Jeff. Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with both what I've heard from Jeff and Dean. The only other comment I'd make is just to reinforce the fact that, yes, there is a different lens we're looking at. And when we start looking at our goals and objectives with our needs, one thing some residents pointed out is, maybe there's a better way to do it, or a different way to do what we want to do, and maybe we break it into pieces. I'd like to know what that is, especially on capital projects. It may not, or it may be possible, it may not be possible. We may be able to separate portions of it and put it out longer. Usually that costs you a little bit more, but I would be interested in knowing, are there opportunities there where we could break something and spread it out over a longer period of time? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right. Okay, Jill, so maybe we would be thinking about a Saturday meeting after we receive some, this back from Shauna with some suggestions that Dean had made. I thought were good. So
Yep, that would be
to
great.
be continued. All right,
Sure.
To be continued then. Great, thank you. So it's great. So item 5B5 is not going to be discussed tonight. So we're going to move on to the town manager's report. Jill, did you have more to add than the COVID report?
No, so this report provides some more detail for you and the public about the reopening by appointment, as well as more information about the park after school program. So that I thought that was important to include. It's still COVID for me. The lifeguard status, we're having a lot of the college students having to return either back to campus or to quarantine before they return to campus. So we've had some challenges keeping the beaches guarded. So we have a button on the website that the public can check in to see every day which beaches will be guarded. And we're trying to work to have the beaches, at least Ridgeville and Hardings, to have that guarded through Labor Day. Usually Labor Day is our end of our beach season, but we're trying to extend that a week. So Dan's working very hard to try to keep the lifeguards available, and it might not be during the week. It could be, sorry, there's an echo, just weekends only. And then good news about grants in here. And I did want to talk a little bit about the census. We did some PSAs, and we have some signs out there, but we're only up to 34.6% of respondents. And so it's really important that even second property homeowners complete the census. Where there's a question about, I think, other places that you occupy or other residences. So I think it's important for that to be completed. And then if I could just, break from my monologue here, and maybe any of you who have completed your census, for me to do it, it was very easy. I think I had to spend more time thinking about my national origin than anything else. So if there's anything that the board can say to encourage people to complete the census, that's great. And we will have census takers now in town. Okay. Shereen, you're muted.
All right. Yes, I filled out the census. It was super easy. As you had said, it was, 10 questions, didn't even take 10 minutes. And for 10 years, it's really something important for us, for funding, for representation, a whole gamut of things. I think we've all been distracted by certain aspects of our lives right now. Maybe we're not seeing as many. I'm glad to see that the census folks are out and about. I did meet up with somebody the other day. They have their yellow shirts on, their ID tags. They knock on the door, and it's done. So I encourage everybody to, as well. So was that it for you, Jill? Did you have any further for us in your report?
I'm muted. The last thing is that the select board legislation was filed. I sent it to Representative Peake's office, and that's the first stop. So they'll let us know if it does get into this legislative session, and they understand it's a priority. And I also copied Senator Sear as well. So everyone's on notice that we would like to get this done and get it done as soon as possible. That's it for me.
Great, thanks. I do see that we've had some good grant awards. I don't know if you made that announcement last week or not. 90 Bridge Street.
Yeah, the newest one that came out was the Pleasant Bay Alliance grant. And this is for participating in the permit issued by Mass DEP in 2018, which was, I believe we received a couple of awards for that collaboration and being the first town. So the details are in the report. It's $132,000, which will go a long way for the 4 communities.
Yeah.
Great news. Jeff, you had your hand up. I saw.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. The census is absolutely piece of cake online. It's really just seamless. So I suggest everybody get online and fill out the census. I did want to comment on Jill's approach to the park program, or the town's approach to the park program, which I think is excellent. I think the way that you've constructed it as opening in the community center by itself and being really open to children until 5:30 and or on that one day 40 minutes after the, or 40 minutes earlier on early release Wednesdays. A very thoughtful approach, I thought. I hope that parents appreciate, the revamping of that program. And I just also wanted to state that the grant that the Pleasant Bay Alliance received follows up on a $250K grant that we received back in 2018. So they've done a really nice job in the Pleasant Bay Alliance generating funds to support the cleaning up of Pleasant Bay. And I just think Jill's doing a great job. So thank you very much.
Any other comments from the board? Peter, Dean?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. Good report. Okay, so our last order of business is public comment. So I'll take a roll of the remote participants to see if anybody would like to comment. Anybody that would like to make a comment?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, George Myers.
Okay, George. Anybody else?
Elaine Gibbs.
Okay. And anyone else?
Mike Waters.
Mike? Anyone else? Mr. Myers, why don't you go first, please?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a couple of points back on the residential tax exemption. In Alex's submission to the board, she lists the number of trusts and LLCs with their totals, which came to about 2,346. And those are divided with the total number and the number with a Chatham address. There's no assurance, in my opinion, that the residential parcel that's held in trust by or an LLC with an address other than Chatham is not occupied by a year-round resident. I am aware of at least one residential parcel where the owner, who's now deceased, had a residential address outside of Chatham, but was a voter in Chatham and a full-time resident. So that distinction, I'm not sure is accurate. I believe it would may be necessary to look at all 2,346 of those documents to determine, or at least determine whether or not there is a full-time resident there. And the same is true, of course, for a residential parcel that's held by a trust or an LLC with a Chatham address is the residence of a year-round resident. So I think you have to look at that very carefully. There may be a lot more than 686 documents that have to be looked at. The other thing that I like to point out with respect to the trust and the LLCs is that once the town grants an exemption, you cannot recoup the funds. Once the exemption is granted, you can't go back and take the tax money back from the taxpayer if you made an error. The only thing that can be done is you can, in the future, you can not give that that taxpayer the exemption. And there's one other point I'd like to make with respect to this is a bit esoteric. This has to do with the Provincetown. Actually, what Provincetown did is they went to the legislature, and an act was passed to give the right to Provincetown to allow landlords to take the exemption if they were renting to year-round residents. And of course, what that does is once you increase the number of eligible parcels, you're going to increase the tax rate. At the same time, when you increase the number of eligible parcels, you're going to decrease the break-even point. So right now, I believe Ms. Kelly determined there were 170 eligible residents who would be above the break-even point. But if an act like Provincetown were passed in Chatham, assuming Chatham accepted the residential exemption, you would increase the number of residences that would be above the break-even point. So, and the other thing is that particular act gives landlords a tax windfall. What happens is the landlord who is not occupying the property gets the exemption, so he gets a tax break, and you can bet that landlord is not going to pass that tax break down to his renter by reducing the rent. So there are a number of disadvantages to what Provincetown did, and in fact, Truro is trying to do the same thing that Provincetown did. I think it's a very regressive form of tax policy. Those are the only 2 points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Elaine, comments?
Yes, I'd first like to mention in terms of the census, I have technically 3 properties and I filled them out on day 1 and I keep getting them in online and I keep getting them in the mail saying, if you haven't done it, but I think that they have to do some catch up. I think there's probably more than 34% of the people who have done it. In terms of COVID and the Chatham Square, I think the state regulations and protocols are inadequate, particularly in a tourist area where there is such high volume and high turnover in our restaurants. I don't think between you and I and the town that they should have been allowed to just do a deep cleaning and open up before they had all of their employees tested. The implications of that, particularly when so many people are out of state, when so many people go there, I think that, and particularly because we have a rapid test now, they were able to get the results within minutes, if not hours, if not minutes. so that they shouldn't have been allowed to open up until all their employees were tested. If we really want to get a control on this, that's what we've got to do. That's just my feeling. I think some of you were surprised that they were allowed to open up when one tested positive, and then they opened up and found out 3 more. Going on to the community center opening, I wasn't able to listen to all of it, and I'm glad things are opening up in terms of town government, but I would just like to point out, as we open up, I was there with several other people who were invited by the town clerk to test the machines for the voting, the election today. And when we came out, and this was a couple days ago, when we came out, this woman kind of verbally accosted us. Why are you here? And what are you doing in this building? She didn't identify herself. And I kind of felt like I was trespassing. We were invited there. The community center belongs to the people. So I would hope as we start opening up that whoever these people are that are monitoring it, treat us as the people who own the buildings. I felt like a criminal, and I was there by invitation to make sure our elections were sound. And I wanted to say snaps to Julie Smith and the town clerk in terms of all the safeguards Chatham has in place for the elections. But I didn't appreciate having this stranger come up to me. I smiled, but I had a mask on, so she couldn't see I was smiling. And then she kind of came at me. So I hope that that's resolved at some point. In terms of the summer residents, I absolutely agree with them that now more than ever, we have to prioritize what we want versus what we need. And that goes to the Council on Aging as well. I hope they weigh in on that, because there are services we can provide without a physical structure that's going to cost $8 or $9 million. In terms of the residential tax exemption, I think Dean and Shireen made 2 very valuable points. This is highly technical. It is highly subjective in many ways. When people have LLCs, every tax advisor tells you to do that to avoid probate. That doesn't mean you're trying to, get around anything. And I also agree with Shireen that there are several different types of summer residents. There are summer residents who actually come here and stay, but I'm telling you, I am surrounded by full-time rentals. These are investment properties. And to say that summer residents somehow, are not taking advantage, they don't stress our public services. The rental properties do. There have been 20 people in a rental property every week here, from out of state. They use water and sewer and parking and traffic and all that kind of stuff. If there were some way that we could separate out the truly summer residents who come here because they are residents versus people who have bought these properties, that would be great. I'm not sure we can do that. So I think that a rental tax, which you had rejected previously, is the way to go. You separate out those people who legitimately use this as a summer residence, but if you rent it out and our services are taxed, you have to pay the town a percentage. And I think it's more than equitable. I don't want people who have come here as a respite and actually use it to have to pay more. But I also, because I have an attorney who said, put in an LLC, why should I be paid a tax more? Because I am just doing what's best for my family. And Dean, I'm very glad as an attorney you're on the Board of Selectmen because you pointed that out. So I hope that we look into this further, and I think the rental tax is a far better way to go than the residential exemption tax. And finally, in terms of the format, I know why your guys tried to do this, and I understand it. You want the meeting shorter, but it's 8:15 now. It's been 2.5 hours, and I don't think public comment is what made it longer. It's really hard for us to sit back here and, try and make notes. I would hope you rethink this. it would have been a lot easier for me to just make a few comments after Bob Duncanson talked or after the SRAC talked, to make people do this. If you want to kill public comment, this is the way to do it. And I don't think that's what Chatham's about. I think we're an inclusive. I'm the only person that lasted over 2 hours, and that's not what you want. So I'd like to think that going forward, particularly now during COVID, when our health is impacted, and there are people here very concerned, and I think people should be able to weigh in. But I thank you for your time, and I guess I'm the last speaker, and you can adjourn the meeting, but I hope you take my comments in the spirit they're given and listen to the public and open it up so more people can participate. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Waters?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make a comment on the residential tax exemption. I think the issue that comes up is that it is a very divisive thing. What it will do will be to divide the citizens of Chatham into 3 groups. One, the summer residents, who will be paying more money and not getting any more services because they are paying part of bills that were previously paid by other citizens. 2, full-time residents of Chatham who are going to have their taxes increased because they fail to fit within the specific categories. They're going to be very troubled by this, and they're going to wonder why the Board of Selectmen is allowing that to happen to them as full-time residents here. The third group is the people who are full-time residents that will benefit. Some of them may be worthy of getting that. They may qualify for it on the various standards you've set down, helping young families, helping the elderly stay in their home, but many of them won't. It's just a scattershot approach. Mm. You could much better spend the regular revenue you get in Chatham addressing all those needs, taking care of the specific people that need childcare, that need some kind of help, the elderly, opportunities for younger families. The summer residents have always supported endeavors like that by the town of Chatham to help those people. But when you do this, you're just making a kind of a scattershot approach to moving money around. And you're going to create 3 different categories. And attempting to get more information, I don't think will be useful, because I think the assessors will wind up telling you, if you want to know what trusts qualify, we have to go through the whole process of looking at the trusts, or we'll never know. If you want to know what residential property that's being leased by people who are Chatham full-time residents who own multiple properties, they will also be getting their taxes increased. You're going to have to make an evaluation of that. So I think trying to get more information will require most of the work be done, and will actually kind of harden positions of people into 3 groups that will be looking at it from point of view of its effect on them, whereas you have the responsibility to look at it from the point of view of its impact on the entire town of Chatham. And I think you'd be well advised to reject it, and I support the remarks that were made in that direction. And I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your consideration of this issue in such great depth. I think it's very useful and helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waters. And thank you for your work on that project too. Okay, so any other public comments from the remote participants? Hearing none, I think I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Peter,
Second.
Second, okay, I'll take a roll. Selectman Kokolas,
Aye.
Selectman Nacastro,
Aye.
Selectman Dykens.
Aye.
Okay, and the chair says aye. Have a good evening, Chatham. Thank you, Jill. Thank you to the staff for the presentations tonight, and for Channel 18 and the IT crew for continuing to allow us to have smooth remote meetings. All right, thank you.
Thank you.